two segments.
With no help from the industry, how can we really know what we're buying?
It's actually great that you took the time as journalists to investigate this issue, but it shouldn't be your responsibility. It should be the responsibility of the supermarkets who make the more profits from the sales of those products.
Is this going to change the way you shop for tomato?
Now, this is the part where they reinforce it. You know, they're like, guys, we want to make sure that we show you how you're supposed to act after watching our piece.
I think that there should be a list of ethical producers, and we as consumers should flex our muscles and support those producers.
Look at her; she's so precious that you got it. That's exactly
that's what we were looking for. Don't be a Del Monte. Don't be a Del Monte.
I'm so happy you came to that conclusion based on nothing.
Information is power, so if you respect your consumer, then you should give us the information that we need to make good decisions about the products that we buy.
And what message do you have then for grocers about this problem?
Do better.
CBC, do better. Do better. Go show me the evidence of forced labor. You did a whole piece which you're taking credit for stopping suppliers, like cutting off suppliers. You're taking credit for that, and you have not shown any evidence of forced labor. That is just atrocious. This is something that I'm not a lawyer or anything, but it just seems like something somebody should be able to sue someone over, because they are ruining people's businesses and livelihoods doing this. And there is not even Adrian Zenz, their expert that they brought in, said there's a high risk. He didn't say that it was happening. He said it twice, not once, twice.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think this is the part where it gets a little bit complicated. I think we pretty much said everything we need to say about this, but what I want to do is I want to add a little bit of background context that comes through in a lot more detail in our work elsewhere, while again trying not to repeat too many things that our existing subscribers know. The U.S. wants to smash China back down. The way that they accomplish this, sometimes by smashing countries back down, is by sanctions. They've done this all over the world. They've admitted that the sanctions they have a malicious intent. Let me see what kind of pictures I have here for sanctions. I like this one. Alan McLeod, he showed that actually somebody put something really interesting in, where they actually did a really good article on New York Times where they showed the true effect of sanctions, where they started out saying how sanctions hurt Iranian women. And then within 24 hours, they actually changed the titles, and they changed it to "The Middle Class Women of Iran Are Disappearing." And the United States is partly to blame. Alan was saying the story appears to have been changed, to be live for 24 hours before it changed. So what likely happened is a higher up saw what was written and demanded it to be changed, lest it undermined support for deadly sanctions against Iran. Here's one. Are well-meaning sanctions. Venezuela's kids are dying. Are we responsible? Yeah. I mean, when you sanction places like Cuba and Venezuela to the level that you absolutely are responsible. And Richard Nephew, who is working with the Biden administration, openly admitted in his book, The Art of Sanctions, that it is economic warfare and it is designed to drive up unemployment. So what's going on now is they're trying to turn consumers and companies against Xinjiang to increase unemployment in Xinjiang, to create civil unrest in China. Now, there is an additional element that goes together with that. Multiple studies have shown that terrorism is rampant in environments of poverty. And so one of China's key tools against fighting extremism in Xinjiang, and there was a lot of it, and I'll get to that point in a second, it was job opportunities and lifting people out of poverty. So when you had the ETIM delisting, so U.S. removed separatist group condemned by China from their terror list, ETIM, also known as TIP in Syria. They operate under the TIP banner in Syria. They cited that the reason they removed it is because they don't exist anymore, which is already a BS answer. The Tamil Tigers haven't existed for even longer, and they are still on the terrorist list. And then so you, of course, had some articles that came out that were a little bit more honest, saying China could face a greater terrorism threat as the U.S. delists the ETIM movement, experts say. Then you actually ended up having people come out like Sean Roberts saying, why did the United States take China's word on supposed Uyghur terrorists, saying that they should have never been on the terrorist list, saying that they barely existed. This is an interesting guy, Sean Roberts. He wrote a book. I read his book. I read it. And it was talking about how horrible it was that Uyghur children in China were also learning Mandarin, the national language of their country. And then he goes on to talk about the Uyghur children in Syria who are training in ISIS camps and being trained to use weapons by terrorists, and saying, and whitewashing it, saying, well, it's not that bad because I looked at it and they have really great holiday parties. It's the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. And some people are even coming out and saying, well, so like Sean Roberts, there's actually more people coming out and saying, well, they never really existed, even though just a few years ago, the US was literally admitting that they were bombing Uyghur terrorists from Xinjiang and Afghanistan and running airstrikes on them. And now there are ETIM. ETIM is in Syria. They are displacing Kurds in Syria, in Idlib. They are working together with Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They are beheading people who are non-Muslim. And if you want to say that this is not a real issue, because that's what people are going to convince you, I want to show you some short clips here. I'm sorry, I'm going on for a bit, Brian. I know you're going to have some stuff to add too, but these are children.
They also feature young Uyghur school children shouting threats to the Chinese government
In Syria. This isn't from Chinese state media. That one is ABC. This one, the CCTV re-aired. This is a video by an ETIM member. And this is a video by ISIS, because a lot of Uyghur kids are training in ISIS-built camps in Syria. This is going on now. And the Western governments, they know these people exist. And this is why they're not creating an open policy for Uyghurs, because they know that some of these people from these areas might end up... Oh, let's say this here. That's a TIP member talking about he'll come back to Xinjiang and kill the Chinese people. So that's what we're looking at. They really exist. To just really drive this point home, I want to show you guys a video of a new ETIM recruitment video. Let me fast forward a bit. I had some military people look at this, and they were saying that these guys are absolutely 100% very, very professionally trained. When you look at how they handle their weapons and everything like that. And just to let you guys know, I'm going to turn the volume down. The music is cool. They make it really loud. The music's cool, but I'm going to turn it down for a second so I can talk to you. You can hear me as the video's playing, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I have an interview on my channel with somebody who was affiliated with Al-Qaeda when he was younger. And he explains all of this in great detail. And he's the one who is regularly monitoring and still in contact with ETIM and Al-Qaeda and keeping an eye on what's going on. He completely rejects these groups now. As I said, I have an interview on my channel, but this is an actual real threat. And I can tell you, these people are going to Syria and they're carrying out jihad in Syria against a common enemy of the West, against Assad. And this is why they don't really care, and they even support them. And but had these terrorists been going to the West and carrying out jihad in the West, all of a sudden the story would be totally different. I've made this point before for subscribers of mine. You would have heard this before. The story would have been about China not doing enough to control terrorism and being a net exporter of terrorism, an exporter of terrorism to the West. But since that's not happening, and we recently saw ETIM attacking Belt and Road Initiative points in Pakistan, killing Chinese people, this could be a very, very valuable tool for the U.S. And the U.S. is very well known for supporting terrorists to accomplish their geopolitical goals. And so to bring this back in, that might have sounded like a very big detour off of our topic. Sanctioning Uyghurs, removing their employment opportunities is a very, very essential part of that as well. So it's kind of a double bonus for them. One, they can create social unrest in China, but also they can restore the environment that will allow ETIM to restore a foothold in Xinjiang, and which is why it was essential for the U.S. to remove ETIM from the terrorist list. Again, there's a lot more detail than that I go in my other videos, but I want to leave it at that point. And Brian, if you want to add some more, I'll let you take over from here.
Sure. Can I share my screen?
Yeah.
So you were just saying, they claim that ETIM doesn't exist anymore, and they're trying to downplay it. But this is from September this year. This is ETIM doing an interview with Newsweek. So they definitely exist. And this is just a game that they play. They did the same thing with the Mujahideen al-Khaliq from Iran. They were saying they didn't exist anymore, but they're running around New York City. They are terrorists. Worse still is that in their past, they had killed Americans, a lot of Americans, and the U.S. is supporting them. So this is something they do over and over again. And I like to show people this article from the LA Times from 2016. In China, rise of Salafism fosters suspicion and division among Muslims. And what this was all about was Saudi state-sponsored Salafism, extremism, radicalization was overriding indigenous Uyghur Islam. This was the actual cultural genocide that was taking place. This is what Adrienne Zenz is always complaining about China undoing. They're undoing this. They're not undoing what was already going on in Xinjiang. This is something China's trying to restore. AP just did an article where they went to Xinjiang and they saw the Chinese government investing in Uyghur culture, the Uyghur version of Islam that has been practiced for generations. They're investing in that. They're not erasing it. They're erasing this Saudi state-sponsored Salafism. And that why is this important? It's because this is what the U.S. does everywhere. It's what the Saudi government and the U.S. did in Afghanistan in the 80s to expel the Soviets from Afghanistan. It's what they're doing in Syria right now. You were just talking about that, Daniel. There's thousands of Uyghur extremists fighting alongside other Western-sponsored extremists in Syria to overthrow the government. And we're going to always hear that if they do admit to, like this BBC article here from 2014 about Uyghur violence, Uyghur extremism, they're going to say it's because they're chafing under policies from Beijing. But that's not true. They're extremists. They seek what they think is jihad and martyrdom, and they'll seek it anywhere they can. They're in Syria fighting Damascus. What does that have to do with Beijing? Because they're extremists. They're not thinking rationally, and they're being used as a pawn in this geopolitical game. If you look at this BBC article, they never talk about any of this anymore. The BBC will never sit and list all of these horrific terrorist attacks. But you could go to this article and you could see they're killing scores of people at a time, and not just in Xinjiang, all over China, outside of China. I said there was an attack in 2015, a year after this article was written, here in Bangkok, 20 people blown up in the center of the city. So this was global terrorism coming out of Xinjiang. This is what China was responding to. This is what they're trying to rectify.
Afghanistan, there was a recent attack on a mosque also, right?
Yeah. I think there's been a series of attacks now. And that's what the U.S. is doing. They're dusting
the first one
off.
was a Uyghur specifically.
Yeah. So this is what's going on. China's version of the war on terror is de-radicalizing people, giving them jobs, creating social stability for these people. The U.S., their version of the war on terror is the last 20 years where they've destroyed nation after nation, creating a swath of death and destruction from North Africa to Central Asia. When they know where there's extremists, they carpet bomb it. China brings people in to give them an education and find them jobs. And this is what the U.S. is very insidiously trying to sabotage China's constructive way of dealing with this. For exactly the reason you mentioned, Daniel, it's because they want to continue destabilizing the region. They have an encircle and containment policy of China that's been ongoing for decades. And Xinjiang is just one of several areas they're working on: Tibet, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and then dismantling their allies in Southeast Asia, and the list goes on and on.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. I think the most important point, it's one that I've made many times as well, was when the real genocide was going on, when these Salafist extremists were coming in and trying to impose a very strict interpretation of Islam onto the people of Xinjiang, and that was not a part of their culture. They weren't wearing niqabs before. Uyghur culture has a 1,000-year history with winemaking, but Uyghurs who were drinking alcohol were being persecuted. There were cases of people having their ears cut off and stuff like that. That absolutely was when the cultural genocide was happening. And if you want to say to yourself, you want to say that China, that's just what China does, is cultural genocide. Obviously, Tibet was the first one also, where they said full-on genocide and they downgraded it to cultural genocide. There was a temple that they said was destroyed by China because they were destroying, Tibetan culture. And then the next year, China was putting it on an application for the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. It was still there. In Tibet, they're investing millions. The Beijing government is investing millions and millions of dollars to bring back ancient styles of tanka, where they do these kinds of colorful paintings on the wall that didn't even exist at the time when the Dalai Lama left. In Mongolia, they're still using the original Mongolian script. They're not even using the original Mongolian script in Mongolia. Kyrgyz people in Xinjiang, the young Kyrgyz people, they still speak Kyrgyz. But in Kyrgyzstan, most young people, or many young people, they don't even speak that language anymore. They only know how to speak Russian. I mean, if China is a country that engages in cultural genocide, they do a terrible, terrible job at it. Ethnic minorities across the board, they weren't subject to the one-child policy. When the one-child policy was implemented before, it was only applied towards the Han Chinese. Now there's more equal policies across the board, but for years and years and years, it was only Han Chinese that were subject to that. Nobody was talking about a Han Chinese genocide at that point, targeted birth control for Han Chinese. They're not talking about how ethnic minorities in China can get into top universities with lower scores. They're not talking about all the preferential policies for them, because it goes against their narrative. Again, you're given these selective narratives, and it is so far from the truth. This going through this CBC report, it was a very, very valuable lesson, not only to better understand what's going on with the Xinjiang narrative, but to keep in mind this is how they manipulate you across the board. And people have been fooled enough times over and over again when there is a geopolitical enemy or target from the U.S. That also should be additional incentive for you guys to expect more evidence, expect more robust evidence being produced before you come to conclusions.
Yeah, and I just want to maybe conclude on this. This isn't just a malicious lie that CBC is telling to poison the Western public against China, the Chinese people, the Chinese government, China's economy. This is doing tangible damage, and they're proud about it. It's right here. Supermarket pulls product, Italian supplier to stop using Xinjiang tomatoes after marketplace investigation. There was no investigation at all. They showed absolutely no evidence of forced labor. All they showed was these companies get their tomatoes from Xinjiang, which all of these companies already knew about. They're pulling their products off the shelf because they are worried about public perception. CBC and other mainstream media corporations are putting these ideas out into the public's mind that this is all coming from slave labor. Nobody wants to be associated with that. Even if it's not true, they don't want to be associated with it. And so they play it safe and they take those products off the shelf. Those are suppliers, business owners, and employees that are going to lose their jobs, or they're going to be set back at the very least. It's real economic damage they're doing. This is why they're telling this lie. There's no secret that the West is worried about China surpassing them. This has not happened in history. We don't really remember the last time a non-white nation was going to take number one position in the world. They will do everything to stop this. We've seen what they've done with their primacy. What will they do to protect their primacy?
Absolutely. And there's going to be some stuff that I didn't prepare here, but I'll overlay it in post, where I'll show you some examples of companies, Western companies, or companies tied to, who have Western customers, who are literally sending Uyghur workers home. They're saying, I'm sorry, we can't employ you anymore. And they're sending them home because it's just not worth the risk. Because they know that when they have Uyghur workers, that the natural assumption is that there's no way they would have come voluntarily. They must have been forced to come here. And they're literally putting Uyghurs out of work. They're accomplishing exactly what they want. There's a video that I'd like to end on that really summarizes some of the key points about what the truth was behind the reports, the main factual things. Let me just play that here.
When we tell these companies we're journalists, they still say they don't use forced labor.
So let me stop there. When they tell them that they are journalists, they tell them the same thing that they told them when they didn't tell them they were journalists, that they don't use forced labor. So there's no point to even say what she just said. It sounds a little bit suspicious when she says it like that, but they consistently said that they don't use forced labor. Okay? Thank you.
When we reach out, Del Monte confirms they use Xinjiang tomatoes, but say there's no worker exploitation.
That was the key point. Also, they found somebody who said that there was no forced labor, but we got no further dialogue with this company in terms of what kinds of audits they do or anything like that. Again, because it's their own narrative.
For Whole Foods, after we reach out to them, they take action too, removing their 365 paste from store shelves, as they put it, out of an abundance of caution.
Oh, you look so proud of yourself, don't you? She looks so proud of herself that she is removing employment opportunities for ethnic minorities in China for an abundance of caution on a story that proved absolutely nothing, but was presented and manipulated in such a way that it's going to make everybody think that, yeah, of course, this is what we should do. I mean, just shame on you, CBC. Shame on you. I think we got everything. I think we covered everything we need to do. Do you want to wrap up with anything else, or was that it?
That's pretty much it. I mean, people just need to keep pushing back against this. This is doing real damage to real people, and it's not just going to be confined to China and people living in China and trying to make a living. This is going to affect everybody. There's companies in the West that do business with China that are going to be impacted by this as this continues to expand. And we just have to look at how the West has been running their society, their collective society. In the last couple of decades, how everything is going down the tubes because they are pursuing this unsustainable hegemony over the planet that they seek to maintain. It cannot be maintained, and everyone in the West is going to suffer as they try to do so anyway. It's completely irrational. We see that it's not working, but they're going to continue doing it. So if you don't care about people in China, care about yourself. This is a dead end that the West is pursuing, and everyone is going to lose in the end.
I hope this again serves as a good example, not only for this particular issue at hand, but keeps people alert in terms of what to look out for on other things completely unrelated to this specific topic, in regards to how media manipulates you and what bad journalism looks like, really. So how about we wrap it up here, Brian? Yeah. Good. Sounds good. We'll see everybody else in the next video. Thanks for joining and sticking around for this long. And as I said, we'll see you in the next one. Take care.